Hi, welcome everyone to the Technical Deep Dive of VMware vCenter Chargeback. My name is Catherine Fan. I'm the product manager for vCenter Chargeback, and alongside the stage with me today is Mangesh Pingakar, our engineering manager for vCenter Chargeback.
Hi.
So a quick disclaimer, this session may contain product features that are currently under development. However, I am proud to announce that we just GA'd our VMware vCenter Chargeback 1.5 today, so this disclaimer no longer applies. So a quick agenda of what we'll be walking you through today. We'll be helping you develop a chargeback strategy for allowing you to gain increased IT cost transparency and understanding of your costs. We'll then talk you through how to use vCenter Chargeback, our technology, to actually configure and manage your costs, generate reports for cost analysis, showback, and billing, and then enabling chargeback integration with our new vCloud Director product. Finally, and then I'll hand it off to Mangesh to talk about how do you actually deploy vCenter Chargeback in your environment, looking at first the architecture and then some of the deployment options for achieving higher scalability numbers and making sure that your environment is protected for high availability. And finally, we'll talk about some of the Chargeback APIs and integration points. So let me start off by explaining why we feel that a shared infrastructure requires a new accounting model. In the physical model, basically you started off with an application request, and you help them size up the hardware that is required for this new application. This hardware is typically covered by a business owner's budget or a project budget, and the business ends up owning all of the hardware that's been provisioned for this particular application. You have an easy one-to-one mapping, so you understand exactly how much this application is requiring from a resource utilization perspective, how much budget has been gone into that. Now, as you're moving over to virtualization, what I see is typically IT will go out and pre-purchase all this underlying shared infrastructure, carving that up and making that available to the business. So now what happens? A new application request comes in, and you give it to them within a virtual machine. However, the virtual machines are all sharing this underlying infrastructure, so it's more difficult to track this one-to-many relationship to understand exactly how much resources are being consumed per virtual machine across your environment. Your virtual machines are also constantly moving around. You have a very transient workload that may be spun up and taken down within a couple of hours, and therefore it can be very difficult to track and make sure that you charge them appropriately. So at a high level, the chargeback requirement is to make sure that you increase cost transparency between IT and the business. The business will want to understand what is the cost for rolling out a new virtual machine. And it's no longer just the cost of the capital expenses of supporting this virtual machine. It's also all the operational expenses. So as the VMware administrative team, you have to be responsible for troubleshooting, monitoring, updating all of those virtual machines, making sure that they're run and maintaining those service levels. So all of that needs to also be factored into the cost per virtual machine. Now, on the IT perspective, your challenge is to make sure that you can determine the appropriate cost for each service level depending on the different tiers of services. So inevitably, a VM that's sitting on Tier 1 storage should be charged more than a VM that's sitting on Tier 2 storage. Or a VM that has Site Recovery Manager, Disaster Recovery Protection should probably have more costs associated than one that does not have any backup or availability protection at all. So you need a way to automatically track and report on the resource usage across this environment and make sure that you have this transparency between IT and the business. So I typically see two big motivations to optimize to get to higher IT cost transparency. Before you started to virtualize, you understood what the cost of a physical server was. And then as you consolidated, you were able to improve the utilization for all of your machines. And you typically found that to run a virtual machine, it costs you less money. However, you want to maintain and continually measure and develop that visibility into what that virtual machine will cost over time, so that you can facilitate additional planning and decision-making for each budgeting cycle going forward. The second motivation is to become more service-oriented. So you want to move away from just managing IT assets to really managing and providing IT services. You want to make sure that you have a standardized service catalog where each one of your applications has an associated cost, so that each time someone comes to you with a new application request, you can reasonably let them know that a 4 vCPU machine is going to cost more than a 1 vCPU machine. Do you actually really need all of those resources? So you want to enable the business or your line of business who's requesting those applications to be really responsible for what resources they're requesting from you out of your IT service catalog. So by getting this increased IT cost transparency, you can really help yourself to achieve higher cost savings by improving your utilization as well as additional automation to get to that level of cost savings. What I see kind of the first challenge then is how do you even determine what your cost per virtual machine is? Just a show of hands, how many of you know what your cost per VM is to run a 2 gig instance today? Less than 5% of the room, all right? How many of you think it's approximately more than 10 cents per hour? Just a rough guess. Okay? So what I commonly see is that most enterprise customers are looking at about 18 cents, 16 cents per hour, whereas you have this very widely publicized benchmark that Amazon is promoting today. Hey, you can come and put out an EC2 instance for 3 to 4 cents per hour. So how do you actually make sure that you can move from 18 cents down to that 3 to 4 cents per hour? Number one, you need to make sure that you can understand what is that cost to run a virtual machine and explain it to your line of business of why it's costing them that much. But in addition, you also have a secure private cloud imperative to roll out additional virtualization projects to improve your utilization as well as reduce that cost through additional automation technologies through virtualization. So we can bring you down to that lower cost. So how do you actually get started for determining what that cost per VM is? Number one, you need to identify what your business goals are and what are your chargeback motivations. Are you just looking at showback purposes to understand how many resources have been consumed and what it's costing you as the IT department to support new incoming requests? Or is it to actually break even, to actually recover all of the costs that you've invested into your infrastructure? Or are you looking to make a profit and take in some of those additional investments and put them into other innovative projects within your IT department? Depending on these different motivations, you may have different methodologies that you may want to evaluate down the line. So the second is to determine what cost elements are going to factor into the cost of a virtual machine. These could be capital expenses, such as your physical servers, your storage, your network, or they could also include a lot of your operational expenses, such as facilities, power, cooling, as well as any labor costs. This will basically depend on your business goals of how much cost are you trying to recover. So you want to lay out all of the different investments that you've made and look at which ones you want to actually recover for. Once you understand what those cost elements are, you want to develop a chargeback strategy and methodology to actually find the optimal fit. So what I see most people starting out with is a fixed cost. It's just a flat fee per virtual machine, regardless of how big those sizes of those virtual machines are. The next methodology is an allocation base. So depending on how many resources have been reserved for a virtual machine, you would charge them differently. Or you may have a small, medium, large size VM or tiers of VMs that you could charge for. Finally, there is a utilization-based approach. It's more of a pay-as-you-go. I'll only charge you for what you use. And this is another model that you can look at actual resource consumption, not just the reserved resources. Or you could look at a hybrid fit. You can mix and match some of these models to best fit your organizational policies. Once you've identified the methodology, you want to calculate what your unit cost will be. What is the unit cost per gigahertz of CPU, per gig of RAM, per gig of storage? Once you have that, you can feed that into your model as well. You'll want to implement a chargeback process. You have a lot of different business processes in your environment, your budgeting process, your procurement process. All of those need to be evangelized with other stakeholders to make sure that they have evaluated and bought into your chargeback methodologies. There will be a lot of teams involved and a lot of integration points with other items, and so you'll want to implement the process across the board. And you'll likely want to choose a technology that can help you automate some of those processes. What I see most companies starting out with is a very simple Excel sheet model. A very manual process of tracking all of their costs. However, once they understand exactly what they want to charge for, they can implement a technology that will help automate those processes on an ongoing basis. And finally, you want to continuously report and revalidate your chargeback methodologies. Go back and adjust what type of cost elements you're looking at. Or maybe you found that this methodology didn't quite fit. So always go back, reassess, and readjust. All right, and so with that, I wanted to introduce you to vCenter Chargeback, which was a product that we released earlier last year. And in a nutshell, it basically helps you do accurate cost accounting for your virtual infrastructure by allowing you to implement fixed allocation or utilization-based cost models depending on where you are in your chargeback methodology status. We really help you with an evolutionary approach to adopting chargeback. The chargeback product will also allow you to charge for different amounts for different tiers of infrastructure or different service levels, and then automate the process of data collecting and scheduling out reports so that you can increase IT cost transparency between you and your line of business. And so for some of the customers that have already implemented vCenter Chargeback over the past year, we've already seen that they've been able to improve their resource utilization and dramatically reduce the costs within their environment by allowing them to show to their customer how many resources have they requested, what that price point was, and how they can optimize for their next budgeting cycle. So our vCenter Chargeback product has 3 basic workflows: setting up a chargeback hierarchy, defining a cost model, and generating some reports. On the back end, we have a separate chargeback database that is pulling information from the vCenter server database, as well as from a new product called VMware vCloud Director. We also have APIs that will allow you to integrate and export the data off into third-party tools. So I'll walk through the first 3 workflows in detail now, and then I'll hand it to Mangesh to talk a little bit about the back-end infrastructure. There are basically 4 major capabilities that we'll walk through today: usage metering, hierarchy management, cost configuration, and finally cost analysis and reporting. These make up the key components of our vCenter Chargeback product. On the usage metering side, there are a number of different cost metrics that you can track within the vCenter Chargeback product. You've got your 4 core resources: CPU, memory, network, and disk. On the CPU side, you've noticed that we've called out the ability to charge for CPU usage in terms of gigahertz per hour, as well as the number of vCPUs that have been configured to a virtual machine. On the networking side, we've allowed you to track both internal network received and transmitted, as well as external networks as well. And these can also include any additional network services that might be monitored through vShield Manager, such as your NAT, DHCP, and firewall network services. In addition to that, we have introduced a number of vServices add-ons that you could track for and charge on a per VM basis. This is namely in the terms of VMware high availability and fault tolerance availability protection, as well as what guest operating system has been configured to a virtual machine. So you might want to charge a higher rate or a lower rate for a Microsoft versus a Linux guest operating system. Beyond this, you can also add any number of custom fixed costs that might relate to non-compute resources and attach that to each of your virtual machines. So let me dive into a little bit more detail on these on the usage metering side. So with the CPU usage, we are calculating an hourly average utilization, not the actual or peak usage. And this is across all of the CPUs that a VM is touching. On the memory usage side, we are looking at the VM consumed memory, which is basically defined as the amount of memory that's been granted to a virtual machine, minus any memory that's been saved from the virtualization memory page sharing capabilities. On the storage usage side, vSphere introduced thin provisioning in vSphere 4.0. And so vCenter Chargeback will also track and make sure that you charge appropriately based on whether the disks are thin provisioned or thick provisioned. Same thing on the VMware View desktop VMs. They've got some storage optimization technologies on their side as well, primarily VMware Link clones. And so we'll track for that on the vCenter Chargeback side, as well as any additional VM swap and snapshot space as well. A quick reminder on the vCenter statistics collection levels. vCenter Chargeback does collect data directly from the vCenter server database, either VC 2.5U3 and up, VC 4.0, or VC 4.1. Now, if you're interested in average memory consumed, you will want to make sure that you set it to level 1 for VC 4.0. And if you're using the VC 2.5U3, you want to make sure that you set it to level 2. Otherwise, those data won't get collected by vCenter Chargeback. Same thing on the average network received and transmitted in disk read and writes. You want to make sure that those are set to level 3. The next set is hierarchy management, which will basically allow you to associate your virtual machines and costs to your different departments, business units, and groups. And so this will basically allow you to have a single chargeback hierarchy that can span across multiple vCenter servers, regardless of where your organizational units may reside geographically. This hierarchy model will basically allow you to define what your reporting structure will look like at the end of your chargeback report. There are basically 3 easy ways to set up a chargeback hierarchy. You can create a custom chargeback hierarchy, define a set of custom folder structures. This could map to organizations, applications, cost centers, and then you can use our drag and drop interface to group and organize those into the structure that you've defined. The second process is you can synchronize a hierarchy with VC Server. So if you already have a structure in place in VC, either based on the VM and templates view or the hosts and clusters view, you can save yourself a lot of work by synchronizing that into vCenter Chargeback. Any changes that you make on the VC side will automatically get reflected on the vCenter Chargeback side as well. And finally, the third is to import a chargeback hierarchy through a CSV file. So this is especially useful if you might want to pull in a structure that's been defined by a general ledger system or other financial management system, set that hierarchy up, set it in a CSV file, and then import that into vCenter Chargeback. Right. So once you have that hierarchy set up, you can start to define and manage some of the costs and attach those to your virtual machines. And this all comes into play through cost models. Now, as I mentioned before, depending on what your chargeback strategy is, you may end up with one of 3 different models. You may have a fixed cost, so if you know your physical server costs $10,000 and you can fit 10 virtual machines on it, you might figure that it's $100 per VM flat fee. The downside to that is every VM is charged equally, so there's no incentive for your line of businesses to ask for exactly the resources that they require. So what I see most companies gravitating towards is an allocation-based cost model. This can be based upon the number of vCPUs or the amount of memory that's been configured to a virtual machine, or if you're using vSphere reservations, it can also be charged based on the amount of guaranteed resources. And finally, the utilization-based cost approach, where even if I've reserved for you 4 gigs of memory, if you've only used 2 gigs, then I'm going to be as fair as I can, and I'll charge you only for those 2 gigs of memory that you used over the past month. So take a step-by-step approach, start simple, and move to a more advanced model over time, depending on what your organization requires. Now, these cost models are defined by 2 different pieces. One is a billing policy, and the second is a base rate. A billing policy basically defines how you're going to bill over a given time period. And as you see, we have several out-of-the-box policies listed here, but they're all based around those 3 main models that I just discussed: fixed, usage, and allocation. If you find that these out-of-the-box models do not specifically fit your needs, we also have a custom billing policy constructor where you can define a specific policy to add to this list. We also enable you to define multiple currency types, so you may have a cost model that's defined in US dollars and another cost model that might be defined in euros. What we don't do is currency conversion, so you will need to set all of your rates in the currency that you've defined. All right, so once you've chosen your billing policy, you want to set your base rates. So this is how much on a per CPU, per memory, per gig of storage do you want to charge. And you do have the ability to charge it on a per hour basis, per month, per year, etc. We've also introduced the concept of overage charges. So you can charge for usage beyond what was allocated to a virtual machine. So all of this can be set up within the base rates tab of your cost model. We also have a fourth tab within the cost model that allows you to do auto costing for any add-on services within your virtual environment. So there are a number of different vServices that vSphere exposes. We started off by looking at your availability vServices. So whether or not a VMware HA or fault tolerance has been configured for a virtual machine, we'll only charge it when that VM has that level of protection. We'll also automatically track any VM creation and VM deletion events for one-time fixed fees. So if you want a setup charge or maybe it's a maintenance charge, you can associate that to a VM creation or VM deletion event. We also automatically track exactly what guest operating system has been configured, not necessarily installed, but what has been initially configured to a virtual machine. And if that changes over time, we'll track that as well. And then, of course, you have custom fixed costs where you can charge them either a one-time fee or a recurring maintenance fee as an example. And this can be any non-compute attributes that you may want to track for. And finally, you get to your end goal of doing cost analysis and reporting for increasing that IT cost transparency, either for showback or for billing purposes. So you can have the opportunity to build these reports at any level of your hierarchy. You can define one at that very high level, at an organization level for management to look at, or maybe you want to look at details at a per VM level for each VM owner. We do have report templates that you can customize the look and feel, the logo, the header, the footer, to really match what your company look and feel will be. And then these reports can be scheduled in a PDF format. We also offer these reports in Word, CSV, and PDF format, as well as XML if you're using the APIs. We've introduced with Chargeback 1.5 some showback reporting capabilities. This is namely a cost analysis dashboard that gives you a really quick at-a-glance view of how your cost and usage breakdowns are going across resources and across organizational groups. So these are listed in pie chart format with more interactive scroll overs. You also have easy access to any of your recent reports that were generated, as well as any top 10 most or least expensive VMs, so you have an easy trackable way to find out who has been consuming the most resources or who is attributing to most of your cost in your environment. We do have two separate user interfaces. One is a vSphere client plugin. So as VMware administrators, you do have that one single pane of glass that you can log in, configure all of your costs, and manage your reports. In addition, we also have a web console view so that you can delegate some of those roles and permissions to your line of businesses, that they can log in, check on some of their costs, and run some ad hoc reports as needed. So next I'll talk a little bit about what we just announced this morning around vCloud Director and vCenter Chargeback. Now vCloud Director provides you an easy way to pool all of your infrastructure resources and deliver them as a service offering to your line of businesses. So you can inevitably create a service catalog with costs associated to them. So vCenter Chargeback has integrated with vCloud Director so that you can monitor and charge for any of the vCloud resources that have been exposed within the vCloud Director product. It will also help you deliver those multi-tenant reports that you're already familiar with and integrate with third-party billing systems. So as a package, you get a very integrated pay-as-you-go solution as you're looking to stand up an infrastructure as a service within either a private cloud or a public cloud environment. So just to dive a little bit deeper on what we mean by this integration, first of all, vCloud Director has exposed a number of new constructs within their environment. So this is namely an organization, a virtual data center, vApps, templates, catalogs, and media files. A virtual data center is nothing other than a pooling of resources as a container of virtual applications. In addition to that, we also integrate with vShield Manager, which provides you access to external network traffic counters, network accounts, and additional network services like DHCP, NAT, and firewalling. vCloud has also introduced a number of different resource management models. The one that most of you are most familiar with is the pay-per-vApp model, where you're basically purchasing virtual machines of specified sizes on an hourly or monthly rate. So in addition to that, vCloud Director has enabled allocation pool and reservation pool models. It's kind of like a wholesale approach where you'll get a set of CPU memory and storage resources for a certain cost. Now the difference between these is that in allocation pool, a service provider, an IT department, has the control over overcommit. Whereas on the reservation pool, you set aside a set of guaranteed resources, but passed over that overcommit control over to the end user. So the next piece is the automation creation of chargeback hierarchies, so that each time a new organization is onboarded or a new vApp has been provisioned, these will be automatically tracked by vCenter Chargeback in a real-time manner. And then finally, the delivery of these targeted multi-tenant chargeback reports on a per organization, per org VDC, or even at a per vApp level. So just to kind of walk you through some of the resource management models, I wanted to show you on the pay-as-you-go model what type of new VM states you might want to be cognizant of. So when a VM is instantiated, it is consuming storage, and so therefore we do start charging for storage. Nothing else is being charged. When a VM state has been powered on and deployed, we'll start charging for your network as that's been connected, as well as your CPU and memory. And we'll stop charging for any of the following events: your suspended, shut down, powered off, or deleted events. When a VM has expired, meaning a deployment lease has expired within vCloud Director, it gets moved into an archive where it is still consuming storage, and therefore you still want to continue to charge for that storage consumption. However, when the storage lease expires, it is automatically deleted, and therefore we stop charging for all 4 resource types. Just to kind of give you a better sense of how this is working, I wanted to walk you through some of the workflow. So number one, you log into vCenter Chargeback to set up your connections to VC, vCloud Director, and through the vShield Manager data collectors. What these data collectors will do is automatically set up all the chargeback hierarchies, set up some of the predefined cost models, and synchronize between vCloud Director and vCenter Chargeback on an ongoing basis. The next piece, you'll configure some of the rates for those predefined cost models that have been installed through those data collectors. These namely fall into the categories of allocation pool, reservation pool, and pay-as-you-go. We also have a separate one for you to monitor any network charges as well. So you want to go into there, leave the billing policy as is, and define what your base rates are for each of these models. So now you're ready to start onboarding some new organizations and departments. So you can log on to vCloud Director, create some organizations and org networks, create a set of org VDC containers, and select a model for what those org VDC containers will be. Are they going to be allocation, reservation, or pay-as-you-go? Once you have that set up in vCloud Director, the system will automatically set up those hierarchies for you, so it is a hands-off process. It will automatically create 4 separate folders depending on what billing model that you had chosen when you had created your org VDC, and automatically categorize those org VDCs by billing model. And then finally, you get to the end state of generating a usage or a cost report. And you can generate this for each organization that has been provisioned within vCloud, or you can break it down at a VM by VM level as well. So just to highlight exactly what's new in vCenter Chargeback 1.5 that we announced today, in a nutshell, it delivers an integrated pay-as-you-go solution for resource tracking and billing in the cloud, really enabling you to drive increased IT cost transparency between you and your line of business. So some of the new features that we've enabled is to help you automate some of that cost management, helping you track if a VM has VMware HA or fault tolerance availability protection on it, what guest operating systems are installed, and any additional VM creation and deletion fees. We've greatly expanded our cost model support to include one-time as well as recurring charges, as well as giving you a custom billing policy constructor so that you have the flexibility to create a cost model that best fits your needs. We understand how important showback and billing is from a reporting perspective, so we've also greatly enhanced the reporting cost analysis features by introducing a dashboard that will show you your top 10 as well as pie charts of your cost and usage breakdowns. And finally, the piece that I'm most excited about was the integration with VMware's vCloud Director. So you can now start to charge for any of your service catalog offerings that have been enabled in it, meter for those resource usage, and really deliver that pay-as-you-go solution. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mangesh to talk about the deployment of vCenter Chargeback.
Okay. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So after taking a look at the business aspects of the Chargeback and various functionality and features offered by it, let's take a look at how the product actually works, right? So this is the Chargeback product architecture. You could see there is the center, it's vCenter Chargeback server here. This is a typical web-based application runs in Tomcat Apache environment. It has its own application web-based user interface supported by most of the latest browsers. Chargeback has its own database component itself. It stores all the cost configurations, organizations, and historical statistic usage data. Then we have vCenter servers, which are basically configured with the Chargeback systems. So you could add as many servers depending on your environment into the Chargeback. Chargeback also works with the vSphere client. So you could have a client plugin, and you could use the same VI client interface for the Chargeback UI as well. All the Chargeback functionality is exposed out through the vCenter Chargeback APIs. These are simple REST APIs, and you could basically write your own application using these Chargeback APIs. Okay. So we talked about vCloud Director and the Chargeback integration. These pictures basically give you some idea about how these products work together. Okay. So this is the vCenter Chargeback server deployment here with the VC Chargeback database and the user interface. This is a vCloud Director server, which works with its own vCloud database. vCloud Director also integrated with vShield Manager server, which basically keeps tracks of all the broadband traffic. So as a part of this integration, what we have introduced is 2 more components here. You could see vCloud Data Collector and vShield Manager Data Collector. So job of this data collector is basically monitor all the events that are occurring in the vCloud Data Director, which are essentially the provisioning various computing resources, provisioning organizations, VDCs, and vApps. All of these events are tracked by this data collector, and basically it's registers all these events in the Chargeback systems for charging purpose. So all of these events that are occurring in the vCloud Director, we call it as the chargeable events, and which gets registered in the vCenter Chargeback for any charging purpose. vShield Manager Data Collector essentially basically listens to vShield Manager server and basically meter all the usage for broadband traffic, transmit, receive bytes, and submit that information into the chargeback server and use for the charging. So basically, that's how these two products work together. And essentially, what you get is end-to-end kind of provisioning up to the charging level integration with these two products. So next thing, we are going to take a look at some of the deployment scenarios, how the chargeback gets deployed. So this is the basic deployment, the small size deployment you could see. A single chargeback server works with a single data collector and works with a single vCenter server environment. This is the most simple deployment scenario. If you have the larger environment or cross-site, multi-site environment, you could deploy a vCenter server across the sites, and chargeback, a single instance, can work with multiple data centers over the WAN. So this is another deployment scenario. This is, we could call it as a sort of enterprise large-scale environment where you could have multiple chargeback servers running under the cluster and under the load balancer. You could have multiple vCenter servers across the different sites, and you would have deployed different data collectors. Chargeback can work with multiple data collectors to pull the data out of various resources. So to categorize, these are the small, medium, and large size environments, deployment environments. You could scale VMs up to 3,000 to 35,000 with as many as up to 10 vCenter servers. And these are some of the numbers to give you some idea about how many VMs and how many hierarchies the chargeback is tested with. So we're supporting up to 5,000 various organizations in the system with 35,000 VMs with 10 vCenter servers. So one of the important aspects of chargeback is the cost reports, and you would need to generate various cost reports throughout the day. So 150 is the concurrent reports you could generate with the system. Okay, these are some of the high availability consideration of the chargeback system. So chargeback, you could deploy chargeback in a clustering environment, and basically it is protected with the HA. We use Tomcat, Apache clustering and load balancing techniques. You could use various database techniques for clustering and high availability supported by database vendors. And Chargeback also has inbuilt support for making data collectors highly available. So if you have multiple data collectors deployed, it keeps them highly available and load balancing within the system. So as you see, there are various components that gets deployed as a part of the chargeback system. There is chargeback servers, database servers, vCenter servers, again vCloud Director and its own dependent components. So this system health kind of gives you the one quick view of all the components and how they are basically running and their system health. It also gives you some idea about the responsiveness of various components in the system. So we have been talking about the chargeback functionality, and all of these functionality is exposed through REST APIs. So REST API is very simple to use. They're all platform independent. You could basically build your own custom kind of chargeback application using these APIs. And all the functionality of the chargeback, such as administration all the way up to generating the cost reports, all of this is exposed through APIs as well. And chargeback products, it's internally use these APIs with the backend server. So all the chargeback user interface is developed based on these APIs. So we'll take a quick look at how to basically use these chargeback APIs to create some of the chargeback constructs in the system. So if you want to add a vCenter server, you just need to call these REST APIs with these corresponding parameters passed to it. So you could just create a chargeback hierarchy with calling this post APIs and hierarchy, passing this hierarchy specific information. You could define various rate plans and costing information, calling this cost model specific APIs. And lastly, you can generate a report using these report specific APIs. Here, I would like to highlight that you could have APIs that extracts all the usage and cost information in the XML format, and you could basically use it for various purposes and represent in different format. Okay, so chargeback system has been also integrated with different billing systems and billing vendors. We are closely working with some of these vendors as well. So this is a case study that will give you a quick idea about how this billing vendors integrates with chargeback and vCloud together. So in this case, we have this vCenter chargeback system which has the vCloud data collector deployed, which works with the vCloud director. And we have this third-party billing system, and let's say they have their own kind of self-service portal, where all the end user comes to this portal for any provisioning needs. So to start with, end user comes to this portal and asks for certain computing resources, which is provided by vCloud director, and the service portal basically registers that request with the billing system for billing purposes. The next step, vCloud data collector pulls out all the information which is provisioned to the end users for charging purpose and submit that into the chargeback system. So chargeback system basically starts monitoring the usage of those provisioned resources and start basically billing cycle for those. And it populates all the information in the chargeback system. It's pretty much like real-time population. So as soon as you add any resources in the vCloud director, it gets populated in the chargeback system. And billing system then use chargeback APIs to pull out all the information from the chargeback, and they pretty much customize based on their requirements and generate the cost reports. So that is the simple steps to explain how this integration works together. So these are the two partners we work closely and develop this system, Aria and Ziora, and they are announcing their integrated products in this week itself. To summary, so vCenter Chargeback basically gets you the easiest way to track your resources and improve visibility of costing in the data center. You could just do that with the 3 simple steps by creating chargeback hierarchies, enter your cost parameters and rate plans, and start generating the billing reports. A benefit you get is improve cost visibility and empower your business to consume IT as a service. So we have various resources available here. This week we'll have a hands-on lab already going on. So if you take a look at Chargeback as a product and you can play with it, there are few sessions and one-on-one going on with the experts. So if you have any specific questions, you can leverage those. And we have all other information available on the site as well here. So with this, we close this session and open up for question answer for next 10 minutes.
As a reminder, we do have mobile surveys if you want to take it on your cell phone. Otherwise, please step up to the mic and we'd be happy to answer your questions. Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you.